Greetings. I'm Shay, Aviation Week Network's Chief Editor, MRO, and I'm here today with David Marcontell, who is a partner at Oliver Wyman, and he also leads Cavok, its technical consulting division. Dave, thank you for joining me.
Sure, glad to be here, Leanne. Thanks for having me.
You bet. As you know, there's so much in flux in the airline and aftermarket today because of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to get your viewpoints on three key factors that impact the MRO market. First of all, let's talk about OEMs. What do you see as the role in the landscape between the MROs and the OEMs due to COVID? Is the balance changing?
Well, you could argue that the balance has been changing for some period of time, but to be fair to both, there has been it's been a very symbiotic relationship. They both require each other to perform certain roles. The OEMs have a key role and responsibility in the manufacturing of parts, of new parts and spares, and that's not going away, of course. And now, of course, the OEMs have also been trying to capture more of the market share, thereby intruding a bit into some of the space that the independent MROs have had. But I think as we put this in the context of COVID today, the reality is that COVID is affecting both in many respects equally, or at least with equal degrees of severity. There's slightly different problems though. So the OEMs, one of the biggest challenges that they have, especially if they've been if their aftermarket programs are power by the hour based, that has been just a dramatic impact because the number of flight hours being flown is dramatically less. Therefore, financial and cash flow requirements are not what they were before. Programs that were sold at cost or even below cost that were dependent upon aftermarket MRO or materials sales are not there anymore, and it is causing real heartburn. The independent MROs in particular are having similar difficulties, but it's not on the power by the hour. It's just simply they lack the volume that they need to cover overhead and to cover basic costs. So they're having to trim pretty substantially or cut their rates very substantially in order to try to at least bring in enough cash flow in order to maintain the workforce that they have. I mean, everybody's very sensitive to losing a trained and knowledgeable, experienced workforce. And so they're all trying to do everything they can to just simply survive when effectively the volume of work is half, give or take, depending upon segment, half as much as it was in January of 2020.
I'm glad you brought up workforce. That was one of the topics I was going to ask you about. Before the pandemic, several companies were struggling to find, technical workforce. And now with all the furloughs, what do you see as the outlook for both hiring and retaining and the future of the industry?
Yeah, it's really tough, and there are multiple levels of concern here. In the near term, the immediate term, the reality is that a lot of people have either left the industry, i.e. voluntarily took early out packages and whatnot, or they were furloughed. We did some informal surveying among the major U.S. airlines and determined that in U.S. alone, there were nearly 5,000 licensed mechanics who either voluntarily left or were furloughed. And so there's enormous human toll to that, to our industry, to the people that have been negatively affected. And our souls are reaching out to all those people, trying to do everything we can to try to comfort them and look for that day that we can bring these people back. The concern is that the longer this goes, and of course all the current predictions, ourselves, our own, as well as others, are forecasting a fairly long and slow recovery. The concern is that many of these AMTs, these licensed mechanics, are simply not going to return. We had a fairly substantial number that took their early outs, but for those that were furloughed, these are highly trained people. They are going to find jobs in other industries that are recovering more quickly. they have skill sets. They know they have skill sets, and the challenge will be that when the workload finally comes back in the airline industry, will these people want to come back and be a part of that airline industry? And our fear is that the answer is going to be no, is that we've kind of got ourselves back into a cycle that frankly we thought we had put to the side, and we would never see again those days where we were going to see the cyclic nature of airlines, and all these hiring phases and these layoff phases and all the rest of that. And now here we go, we're at it, we're into it again for no fault of our own, but we're into it again. And the consequences, we believe, will be that we will see a staffing shortage before the industry fully recovers. We're going to have that much of a difficulty in filling roles, not this year, not early next year, but as we go into 2022 and 2023, we're going to start having difficulty filling certain roles.
So this is something that the MROs, airline maintenance and engineering organizations should really be thinking about now.
They really need to be thinking about it now, because it is. And in fact, I mean, I've talked to several airline maintenance and engineering chiefs, and they are thinking about it right now. They're already thinking ahead to, oh my gosh, where am I going to find these people? 2 years from now, when I have reasonable confidence that a vaccine has taken effect and so on, and that the industry is starting to recover, they're just terrified they're not going to have them. So they're really starting to, they're not stopping, or they're not walking back from some of the commitments they've made around training programs, the relationships, the joint ventures that they've created with schools, and et cetera, and all the things that are being done. We know that ARSA and the trade organizations are also remaining very diligent about keeping those programs that got funded, federal and congressional funding, to support growing our making this an attractive industry to go into, that those programs are still alive, very much alive, and quite frankly, they need to continue to be funded and supported.
That sounds good. Lastly, we've that lessors used to traditionally have owned about 40% of the fleet, but airlines aren't exactly sure what fleets they're going to be bringing back, when. So what does that leasing transfer, leasing maintenance look like?
Well, I think it's going to be tough. I mean, it's going to be interesting for the lessors. And I'm going to give obviously some of my own personal opinions on some of this, but let's first start by recognizing that with a substantially reduced fleet, active fleet, lessors at some point, and they've been working as best they can with the operators and the reality that the operators have had. But at the end of the day, a lot of lessors, most lessors, they finance these aircraft. They have rent, they have to pay, right? And so the reality is they've got to pay the banks that loan them the money, or they have obligations to the investors that gave them money to buy the aircraft that they were then in turn leased to the operators. Operators have negotiated, understandably, significantly reduced rents or reductions in various financial structures to lower their burden, to give them time for the industry to try to recover. We believe that this will come to roost with many of the lessors, and that we'll start to see, just an incredible level of financial difficulty on many of the lessors. Not trying to suggest that they're going to go out of business, but I think we will see some of them exit the industry for sure. But what's going to start to happen, in my view, is that the competitive environment around leases is going to get uber competitive. And what you're going to find is that for those, there's fewer and fewer lessees, i.e. people, airlines wanting and needing to lease an aircraft, and with plenty of people, with plenty of lessors out there with a product to lease them. And so how do you pick? Well, you pick either based upon the base price, the rent that you're going to pay, or you start to sweeten the deal if you're a lessor with, well, I will start to manage certain costs. I'll take that risk of heavy maintenance costs, or I'll take the risk of certain engine costs, and so on and so forth. And these have been segments, areas of spend that lessors have historically completely stayed away from. They just like, look, the operator has to maintain its own maintenance, and they collect reserves on the behalf of it, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's up to the operator to go source their own maintenance and take care of all that stuff. I just wonder if the competitive environment's flipped a little bit here, and that you'll start to see lessors get a little more creative around presenting solutions to the operators that encourage an operator to lease an aircraft from them as opposed to the guy next door.
So if this happens, do you think the way lease returns occur is going to change? They've been a headache.
Yeah.
The triangle between MROs, operator, lessee, is that going to change?
Not too much, not for that reason alone. I think at the end of the day, transitions are not going to lease transitions, aircraft transitions from operator A to B are not going to dramatically improve until we have, at an industry level, adopted a true blockchain maintenance methodology where we're able to capture the records of what was done, who did it, in a way that is secure and confident that it represents the actual maintenance, and the regulators buy off on it, and the lessors buy off on it, and the financial institutions buy off on it, and all the above. And while there's been a whole bunch of blockchain solutions, out there, different companies presenting their own. This needs to ultimately become a common standard across the entire industry, or at least a huge block of the industry. And we're just not there yet. I've for long believed that has to start with the OEMs. And really, if you want to get down to it, I think that starts with the big OEMs, the prime manufacturers. If they start producing airplanes where there's a blockchain delivered with all the parts that came onto that aircraft, and that blockchain is maintained as the aircraft is maintained, and as people contribute to maintenance on those airplanes, then we'll get to that day when all of this can be fairly easily and confidently transferred from A to B. But until that time, we're still a ways away.
Well, the pandemic is forcing a lot of change. Some of the digital initiatives are happening. So does blockchain become one of them?
I think it continues to iteratively move forward. I guess I would submit that I don't see COVID in and of itself forcing that to happen. We have seen technology, COVID drive particular technologies, particularly those that are dependent upon physical presence, to advance at a much more accelerated fashion, right? We're now seeing remote inspections take place. People doing engine inspections remotely, evaluating the condition of things without ever being present. All of that is great. We'll continue to get people and the regulators and the operators and the MROs comfortable with that. But this is a situation where these transfers is not really a function of, well, I don't really want to be on site. It has to do with the fact that there is no seamless way to assure me that the maintenance status of that airplane or that component, that engine, is indeed what you say it is until I've seen the records. And that's why we do this. Good
point, unless you want to chalk it up to an efficiency, but I guess that could be a topic for a whole nother conversation.
Indeed.
Sounds good. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your insights and time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Leanne. Take care.
Thanks. You too.